We all have that one game from our childhood we remember fondly, no matter when we grew up. Depending on your age, that could be a simplified reimagining of an arcade classic on the Atari 2600, a collectathon on the N64, or a narrative-driven action-adventure on the PlayStation 2. While modern games offer striking visuals and crisp audio we could hardly have dreamed of as kids, there are some things their ancestors did better. That said, old games were by no means perfect, and there are many things they didn't get quite right. Join us as we explore what we loved about old video games and what we're glad has changed.
Let's face it, as much as we loved our childhood gaming consoles or PCs, their hardware was pretty limited compared to modern tech. But you know what they say? Necessity is the mother of all invention, and game devs really took that to heart. As a result, they found countless ways to work around those hardware limitations. Early graphics hardware only supported sprites with pixels so large you can count them by hand. With such a limited canvas, designers had to get creative and really think about how to show things they wanted us to see. Every pixel mattered, and despite those limitations, many 2D sprite games managed to tell some of the striking stories in gaming history. Hardware limitations did not stop at sprite resolutions. Take the original Game Boy from 1989, for example. Its tiny screen could only display 160 by 144 pixels, and you could only draw a maximum of 40 sprites at once. On top of that, no more than 10 sprites could appear on the same scan line. And if that wasn't enough, the Game Boy was a 4-color system, capable of only showing a few shades of grey, or green as shown on the original screen. Developers found clever ways around those limits, using tricks like splitting sprites into smaller objects, or getting creative with layers.
Using pre-rendered graphics was another way developers got around hardware limitations. They'd build 3D models and environments, render them from specific angles, and turn the results into static images for weaker consoles to display, creating the illusion of 3D on hardware that could not handle it natively. Even after the jump to full 3D graphics, developers often relied on pre-rendered visuals to make their games look more detailed on limited hardware. This was common on the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64. Think Final Fantasy VII, or the early Resident Evil games. In these cases, complex backgrounds were rendered ahead of time and used as static backdrops. During development, rendering each scene could originally take minutes or even hours, but once saved as an image, the console could display it almost instantly. Pre-rendered visuals work well for games with fixed camera angles, where developers control exactly what players see. And while they haven't aged quite as well as handcrafted 2D sprites, pre-rendered visuals have a special charm that give many games their unique, iconic look that's difficult to replicate.
Billboards are a related technique, where developers take an object that originally would have been a full 3D model, like trees, bushes, pedestrians, or barriers, and turn them into flat representations. These are placed on planes in the 3D world that rotate to always face the player's camera, creating the illusion of a fully 3D object. Billboards work especially well for background elements, like distant foliage or crowds in the sports and racing games. Players typically move past these objects quickly, so rendering them as full 3D models wouldn't be worth it. Using 2D billboards allows the hardware to draw them more quickly, which allows developers to add lots of little details that makes the world feel alive, without wasting limited resources of the system. Some developers were even bold enough to place billboards front and center. Mario Kart 64 is a great example. Both the player and NPC characters aren't full 3D models, but flat 2D sprites. Each character was pre-rendered from dozens of angles, and the game swaps in whichever one best matches the camera's perspective. The effect is incredibly convincing, but rotate the camera to an angle the developers never intended, the illusion quickly falls apart.
Developers didn't stop at pre-rendering backgrounds or sprites. They also used baked-in lighting to make game worlds pop without slowing the game down. By pre-calculating light data and shadows and storing them in textures, games could look polished without any performance hit. Games like Spyro the Dragon, Rayman 2, and Final Fantasy VII leaned on this trick a lot. The colorful gradients and soft shadows could make worlds feel fun and whimsical in some games, while in others, moody shadows helped pull players into deep, atmospheric dungeons, showing just how versatile this technique could be. Just like accurate lighting and shadows, reflections in 3D games are tricky to pull off. In older games, developers often copied and flipped models to show a reflective version of the scene, making mirrors, water, and shiny floors look convincing without calculating light rays in real time. It wasn't perfect, since reflections often lacked details and only looked right from certain angles.
Up until now, we all agreed that we love clever workarounds. However, we're mixed when it comes to the next two entries. Some games limit how much players can carry or store. Sometimes it's technical, other times it's pure design. Inventory management mechanics are a classic example. By giving players just a handful of slots, the game forces them to decide what to carry, what to use, and what to leave behind. Take Pokemon Red and Blue. Your bag could only hold a few things, and TMs or key items quickly gobbled up precious slots. Exploring caves or long routes often meant choosing between picking up a new item or tossing that X attack you were sure you'd need later. To make matters worse, the game didn't even tell you what the new item was unless you had space, adding just the right amount of frustration. In games like Resident Evil, limits make sense. Item slots are tight, and your saves are restricted too. It forces players to strategize. Wrong choices can come back to bite you, adding tension that fits the horror. Other times, the limits just feel silly. In Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, each garage can only hold up to 4 vehicles, no matter its size. Apparently, the engine struggled to track more cars, but it still feels ridiculous that players can only park 4 cars in a massive airport hangar.
While we're on the topic of early GTA titles, let's talk about navigation, or more accurately, the lack of it. Before SatNav or Minimap GPS were standard, players had to rely on the in-game map screen and their own sense of direction. GTA 3 didn't even have a map screen. Just a radar. Seriously, what did the devs expect us to do? Pull over and ask some guy for directions to the Don's place? On the one hand, not having a glowing line showing you exactly where to go could be really rewarding. But let's be real, it could also be maddening. If you were new to the game, bad with directions, or unlucky enough to have a mission on another island, things got messy fast. How many times did we drive straight toward a waypoint only to realize we needed to cross a bridge far away? It was immersive, sure, but we can't say we missed that particular struggle.
Some older games loved making players struggle with the controls. Tank controls on early Tomb Raider made controlling Lara feel like trying to maneuver a forklift through a narrow warehouse, rather than being nimble and acrobatic. Part of it was hardware limits, like D-pads instead of analog sticks, but some later games had no excuse. Even then, some games never quite nailed the controls. The result, you were constantly missing the exact angles for those tricky jumps. If clunky controls were one problem, inconsistent control schemes were another. Even today, you'll run into games that decide to do things their own way, but at least there's some standardization now. But back then, it was chaos, even within the same genre.
And then there's the lack of autosave, which we'll never quite forgive. By the PS2 era, it's baffling that some major games still refuse to include it. Grand Theft Auto, for example, made you trek back to a safe house just to record your progress. Early Pokemon was no better, since you had to remember to hit start and save every time, or risk losing hours if your battery ran out. Some of this comes down to technical limits or old design habits, but it still feels like developers dragged their feet on something that should have been standard far earlier. And that was our trip down memory lane of the things we loved and loved to hate about old games. Did we miss any of your favorites? What game mechanics drove you absolutely crazy? And which ones do you secretly miss? Drop a comment and let us know. We love hearing your stories, frustrations, and nostalgia moments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our other videos.